Hey guys, I'm Vineet. Welcome to Let's Do Coding, another super video. And today I'm going to tell you how you can master the art of sequence diagram using PlantUml in just 30 minutes. Yes, if you have been old school and have been using something like a draw.io, Lucid Charts or PowerPoint, well, probably you should know the pain to draw these sequence diagrams. Well, after this video, you would be able to create a very complex diagram like this in just few minutes. Yes, in next half an hour you are going to master the art of sequence diagram and hopefully a lot others as well based on PlantUml that should cover like whatever you get across on your day-to-day basis. So make sure you watch the video till the end because this is going to be a super insightful video and most importantly it is going to be a great fun, believe me. And if you are coming here for the first time, subscribe to the channel and hit the bell icon so you don't miss anything. So without further ado, let's dive in. So before we actually move into the code, I'll take a minute to give a brief context on what exactly is PlantUml. Well, so PlantUml is a diagram as a code library in very simple terms. And when we say a diagram as a code, it means like we define our diagram as a set of statements, not as the objects or lines, but as a statements, and then the library generates my diagram on basis of those statements. So this is very much in line with your infrastructure as a code or a lot of as a code other lingos going on these days. And the best part is PlantUml not just generates the sequence diagram, you can generate class diagram, activity diagram, deployment diagram, solution diagrams. A lot of these diagrams you can directly create and it can integrate with your AWS, your Azure. A lot of these libraries are readily available. You can directly use all those and create your diagrams. So that's very much for the context. Now actually move in. You need to have the PlantUml server that you can do, but the easiest way to move forward is to get the extension installed in Visual Studio Code. And to do that, simply open the Visual Studio, go to the extensions, type here PlantUml, alright, and you get the extension from Jebs. This seems to work pretty well. I've been using it for quite some time. Just hit install and it will work. Yeah, it installed. Now one more thing that you need to do is to set the Java path. It needs Java to run, so you need to set the path for Java bin folder, and to do that that is also pretty easy. So in most cases you might already have that installed. In case it is not, you need to go to environment variables and then go to the path, and you need to see like if the Java is here or not. So if you see over here, I have Android installed, and that's the easiest way that I can find my JDK installation path. In case you are not having that, you can download the JDK from Sun Oracle and Oracle basically, and then you can install it. So I'll just open the JDK path and set the path to Java bin. Alright, so let's quickly set that as an environment path, and I can go into the path and I can add a new entry over here. There I can define the Java path and we are good. Alright, to get the wheels rolling, press Ctrl N to start a new file. You can set the file type over here, which is PlantUml in this case. I can just do it like this. And let's just save the file as well so that we can use that in future. To save it, it will automatically give the PlantUml extension over here. So you can either have it as .plantUml or the default format that is WSD, that is created by Visual Studio Code. So I'll just name it as dive and it will save that file. The first thing that you need to do whenever you're working with PlantUml is to get the header and footer, which defines like the name of the document, sort of a start and entry points. And that is pretty simple. We need to write start UML followed by the name. So let's say and in the last we need to have and UML. That's it. So at any point of time, if you need to preview your diagram, you want to see like what is the current state, how it is being created, you can just press Alt D and it will open a preview window over here. Let me just zoom in as well. All right. So right now we don't have anything. That's why we are getting it in like this. So let's add some objects over here and see like how the diagram shapes up. All right. So in any sequence diagram, we have actors and we have participants. Actors are the objects or participants that actually initiates a communication. It's basically a type of participant, and participants are different stakeholders, entities, services that process your request response like that. So let's create actor first, and let's call it user. So what I'm doing over here is I'm using aliasing, and with aliasing you can have a sort of a different name that is displayed, and for internal reference you can use a separate name. So wherever this user is displayed, it will always show as user. So I can just name it as a web user like this with a space, and for internal purposes I will use the web user format. All right, now we have created that. Let's quickly refresh the diagram. So there seems to be some problem. It's not creating the diagram. Let me just close the Visual Studio Code and reopen it. So sometimes you do that problem with the extension. Most of the time it works fine, but yeah, sometimes we do face. And let me try it now. It should create a diagram with a web user. Yes. So if you see, we have the diagram here at first. Now let me just do some alignments over here. All right, so we have the actor. Now let's add the second participant, which is a front end, so front end portal or front end service. I'll just call it front end, and we will use it as portal. All right, so it should automatically refresh after some time, and we have front end on the screen. All right, that looks good. Now, how do we actually communicate? Because we are having sequence diagram and we need to call from one object to other. Well, that is actually the beauty of this. So all the states, like how we are communicating, that we define as a part of code. So in this case, we simply need to do it like this. Web user, it calls my portal. Yes, and you should see a line over here. Yes, that line is created and it shows the first sequence that we have. Orders request. And we should have the orders request. Now, what happens when the request is returned? That's a response. And how do we return a response? Well, it's pretty easy. Just the way we send the request, we can also send in the response. So we need to have a portal which calls in my web user response. All right, we are done. So guys, here we are with just 1 2 3 4 5 6 just 6 lines of code, and we have our first call that is being made to my service and the response as well back. All right, so the next thing that we are going to see is actually the activation of the request cycles. And how we are going to do that? Well, just as the name suggests, we will type in activate, and then we need to pass in like which lifecycle we are going to activate. In this case, it's going to be portal, and that will activate the portal. This represents that the life cycle is active and we are good. Now we also need to deactivate that, and deactivate is also very simple. We just send in as portal. All right, that part is done. Actually, if I want to do it, I need to do it like this. Anyways, so this works fine. We have a diagram, but anyways, this sometimes seems to be a very difficult format, typing each and every item, and there is one particular shortcut for it. Actually, there are a lot of shortcuts, but this one is like I find it very useful. And the way is like you need to go to the request and enter a plus plus. And what it does is basically it is the same thing as we define activate portal. So when we send a request, from object A to object B. On the object B, we define plus plus that says activate the life cycle for object B. And if we are activating a life cycle using plus plus, just make a wild guess how we can deactivate it. Well, if you guess it right, we can do it using a minus minus. And just re-render it. Yes, and the response is the same. So guys, we have the first actual flow along with the lifecycle states working in. All right, so now let's add some more participants to our diagram. And what happens when your front end receives the request? Well, front end is within the browser itself. It's not something outside of it, and it basically needs to communicate to a gateway. The gateway would be the first hop on the backend side. So let's define a gateway, and in this case we don't need the aliasing. Let's just add a gateway directly. That should work out. And we have the gateway over here, and my portal is now sending a request to my gateway. And what's the request? The request is let's say get API slash v1 slash orders, which is basically my get request. If you see, the beautiful diagram is generated. And we also need to do one more thing. We need to activate the life cycle, so that we can do with the plus plus. Now what happens if you want to split the, let's say if you want to have something in double line? Well, we can put anything in a new line using the slash n operator, and that way we can pass in the parameters which appear in two lines. So this particular way we can use for any of the objects, any of the displayable formats or objects that you see on diagram. So we can apply it for anything. Anyways, so that part is done. So for our gateway, the first thing that we are doing is we are doing authentication. So let's add one more participant over here. Participant identity server as identity server, and my participant is created, and my gateway needs to send the call to my identity server for authentication. So that should authenticate my token, and we can start the lifecycle here as well if we want. That's up to us. Alright, so now the request is received by the identity server, and let me just change it something like this. It should make it more friendly. Yeah. Alright, so one thing if you notice is like we just use the word identity over here, and that has created a new entity. So we don't need to define all of the actors, players, participants in the header section. Let's say if we use a new name anywhere in the lifecycle, it will automatically create that participant as a normal participant. But we already have created that, so it's a best practice. We define all the stakeholders at the top of the file, so everything is in control, like what we are using. It actually helps out a lot in normal run. Alright, so now what we need to do is to define a step that says that identity server is processing a request. And how can we do that? So the identity server, and we can just add again identity server. And what this will do, this will create a loop, a self request within the identity server that says validate token. And again I can use a new line over here just to a little bit beautify it. That works out well. Alright, so let's say the request is successful, the token is validated. In that case, we will send the request back to our gateway with a success operation. And here goes our line. Perfect. And now we need to close in the request for identity server at this point of time. So how we going to do that? We can put in a minus minus. Perfect. All right, so that part is fine. We have that working. Let me just do it something like this. All right. So if we do it this way, sometimes the diagrams becomes too messy. So one way of segregating that is to have groups around here. And the way we work with groups is something like this. We just use word group and we can solve something like this. Which creates, now it will not work as default because we need to use the word and as well. So once we define the start and end, then it will create the group for us. And if you see, the group is created with all these steps included. So whatever objects are included inside the group, it will create an outline around that. So if we just put it like this, it will also cover the web user in itself. But let's keep it for here now, and I'll just put a tab over here. So we have one more option over here that we can define, that is called an else, and that is actually quite easy. We can define a lot of states that works like where we have a if else condition. So let's say we need to define a flow where my request has failed. So I can put in something like this. I do a tab, and again it is pretty simple. Identity server sends a request to my gateway. That my request is failed. All right, that part is fine. But in this case, the better way is like we do not close the activity over here since we are also having another step, and this becomes a better place to actually close in the activity, and we do it like this. All right. Now, once we have the gateway receiving the request, we need to send the request from gateway to my portal. The request has failed. Let's call it authentication failure. All right, so we have authentication failure, and we also want to send a request back to the user. How we're going to send that? Again, we just add one more step from portal to my web user, login again. All right, so that was fine. So this is a very pretty common use case where you need to define, let's say you want to group some sort of activities together, and you have to define if else sort of condition where the correct way in one path is like this, in some other way it would be something like that. So all you can define using this way. All right, so one more thing that we can do, if we have some more conditions, let's say in case of authentication failed, something like authentication challenge or others, just hypothetically speaking, in that case that is also pretty easy. We can just add more conditions over here, authentication failed 2, let's say, or 3, and it will generate, and those conditions will be added. So that way you can define your complete flow, how that actually looks into as a part of a sequence diagram. So if you have been doing that using draw.io, PowerPoint, or other tools, well, that has been that would definitely have been a mess creating these objects, and defining and creating these objects for the first time. It's pretty easy. I would say it's pretty easy, a little bit easier, but at a time like once you have to update any of these diagrams or objects, then it becomes the actual mess, realigning each of these items. All right, now let's add some more feature to it. We have to, let's say, create a dotted line. That is also pretty easy. We can do straight away by using a double dash with a here, and what that will do, it will actually create dotted line. If you see the validated token, so that lines become a dotted one over here. Let's consider a few more cases within the same set of diagram before we actually move to the next level. So we can also affect some sort of a sticky notes on the same diagram, and that is also quite easy. We just need to define note, which says we are writing a note. Then the next thing that we need to do is to define like where we want that. Do we want that on the left? Do we want that on the right? So let's just put it right side over here for this diagram. And what is the note? We say authentication has failed, and that creates a perfect sticky note over my diagram. So with the same approach, you can create any number of annotations across the diagram. That makes it pretty useful. So all of these items are defined on PlantUml website. You can go, you can click over here. So if you see like all the different type of documents, diagrams that are being supported, and you can click sequence diagram. So all of these things like what features are supported, how to do that, so they are defined over here. So there are pretty lot of options around that. If you see the line styles, how we do that, so all those we can adapt. All right, that part is done. We added a note. Now let's add some color to it, and let's assume this case. So adding color is pretty easy. So if we have to color the line, if you see the flow lines over here, so within the line we can create a square brackets and then hash followed by the color name. So that should create a color over here. If you see, the image is turned to red, and likewise I can just copy it and have it for all the narrative flows. All right, that should look good. And if my response is successful, in that case I want to have it as a green, and voila, my line is turned green. So that way you can add it to it. You can also add colors to different participants or objects, and that is also pretty simple. So if you want to add a color to a participant or object, similar object, the easiest way, just go to the object. After the name of the object, you need to define what's the color. So in that case, if I put yellow over here, it should create a yellow object for identity server. Let's wait. I added it for front end. Let me change it for identity server. So if you see, the identity server color is changed to yellow. So we would be shortly seeing like how we can apply different themes. But anyways, this way we can define like if we want to change any of the objects or colors. So that is pretty easy. All right. So till this point, whatever we have covered up, that should pretty much cover all the basic day-to-day scenarios. You can just repeat these or modify these steps, arrange them like as per your use case, and it will generate your diagrams as per your requirements. But there is some more flavor to it. Let's quickly go through that as well. So if you see over here, we have different activity types that you see. We have boundary, control, entity, database, right? So let's add a few more participants to our diagram, and I will do participant web API, or rather REST API, and then the REST API is going to communicate with a database, orders database. So that should generate two layers, two entities, and now it is saying like there is some error. Let's quickly see what is the problem. So if we need to add a space, just put it in a double quotes, use aliasing and do it something like this, and now this should work. Let's see. So at any point of time, you can press Alt D if you want to do a hard or manual reset. So that way it will work out. Alright, so we have the diagram, we have the database that is being constructed, and we have the REST API, the new participant in our system. So let's now let's move to the next stage, and the next item that we need to do is to call the web API our authentication is successful, we need to call the web API, which is going to call the database in turn to fetch all the orders for the user. And you might have guessed it right, we define a gateway which calls my web API, sorry, REST API, and that, what, let's call it get API slash v1 slash orders, which is my standard order. So let the diagram be generated. Of course, I can press Alt D. Sometimes it just stops over there, and we have the flow over here. Let's start the activity as well. How are we going to do that? Using the plus plus, and my activity is started. All right, and then so my REST API has received request. Let's say it is going to do some internal processing, filtering around that. So we need to create a self loop. And how do we create a self loop? Yes, you guessed it right. We use the REST API. We use the same object as a source and a target, and that way it generates a self-referencing loop. And let's call it do some processing. And let's also just for a little bit better visibility, let's color it as well. All right, this should generate a loop. We have that, and I rather have that as a dotted line to represent internal processing. All right, now we have the processing done. I need to call the database to fetch all my orders, and let's call it query orders, and that will receive. And again, let's start the lifecycle over here, and my order database is gonna call my REST API with orders, the actual orders, and at that point of time I will just remove the activity. Well, perfect, but it doesn't look tidy. It looks very cumbersome. So let's just put the complete flow in a group called call order API. Let's do it that, and let's end it over here. And I'll always prefer to use a tab. Gives me a well-defined line or a set of objects which are grouped together. All right, so now this part is done. So the next thing that we are going to see is nested groups. So you can have any level or any number of groups, one inside the other one, and the process is again very easy. Database interaction, and we end over here, and it will generate a new group just like that. And again, just tab it. It's a good practice. You have all your statements grouped and aligned. That gives a better readability, anybody reading the code. All right, so let's say we have received the orders object from database. What we need to do is to have a loop over the collection. Now it can actually vary in your case, like there are different options, but the idea here is to show how the loop works and how we can represent it in my sequence diagram. And again, the steps are pretty basic. Just define a loop, and then what exactly we are doing. So in this case, let's assume we are calling the find shipping status for my order, which is coming from an external provider. And once we have that, so if you see at this point, we have the loop object created, but since there are no participants that are defined over here, so it creates a default loop at the starting. So once we start adding the participants, it will be corrected. And let's add so I'll just use the entity type just to represent an external service, and I'll just name it as all right. That should look good. External shipping service, that's fine. And now my system is going to call that, and for that we what do we call? We call from REST API to my, sorry, external shipping service. Alright, so that should work fine, and I have my status. And again, best practice, start the activity, and from external shipping service, send the response back to my REST API and close the activity at that point of time and return the response. All right, that was fine, and at that point of time, my this is end. So now what we want to do? My REST API has the response. Send the response back to my front end. And how we are doing that? I think you would be pretty expert at this point of time. We just call it portal and orders. Well, that was fine, but if you see, the object is actually, the lifecycle is actually overlapping. How we can close that? Yes, we can use a minus operator and it will close the object lifecycle there itself. Then finally we have the portal to web user as a response. I think we did that pretty fast. It didn't take much time. It would have taken a lot of time if we have done that in our draw.io, PowerPoint, or whatever tool that you have been using so far, if not using PlantUml. But it's pretty much easier over here. And the best part is from the maintainability perspective. Let's say what if you have to change 1.1 flow over here, so that you would end up cascading the changes across. With this approach, it's pretty much easy, pretty much managed. That is going to solve most of the cases that we end up doing in a day-to-day operations. But few more quick pointers that can come handy at certain point of time. So let's say I don't want to put the external shipping object at this point. Let's say if I want to have this object to show somewhere over here at the point where it is being called the first time, and the reason being to show some sort of a life cycle. Well, that is also pretty easy, and what we need to do is we need to use the create keyword and then followed by the external service. And what it will do, it will move the object at a point where it is being constructed. It's again personal preference, how you want to see, how you want to design your diagrams. That's totally up to you. And the other thing that is quite useful is the numbering part. So let's say if you want to number all your calls across your diagram, well, you can do that using a keyword called auto number. And if you see, like, it will create the numbers to all the objects starting from here 1 2 3 4 5 6 7 8 9 10. But problem is you have it fine till 1 2 3 4 5, but this should be a 5 in case of a failure, and then this should be a 7, and it is very easy to fix that. We need to reset the numbering. And where we gonna do that? Well, at the point where we want to reset it. So what we do is where we give auto number and then followed by the number that we want to start. So in this case it is 5, and if you see we have the 5 success case and 5 failure case, and at 7th point it is closed. For all the successful cases, the request from gateway to REST API, this should be number 6. And how we gonna fix that? Yes, we gonna put it 6 over here, and that should correct my path. Now let's quickly see one more aspect of it. Actually, we can have sub numbering as well within my groups or my blocks, just to iterate in a better way. To do that, that's pretty simple. Just go to the point where we want to define the number, and at that point of time, just give the numbering as 8.1, something like that. And if you see, it will automatically start incrementing the last segment of the numbers. Well, how you gonna fix that? We gonna come over here, put auto number, and then we put a keyword called inc, which stands for increment, and that should fix it automatically. Now, one quick point over here, if you are having multiple layers, let's say x.y.z, in case you can define the starting point A or B or C, depending upon which level you want to change. So even if we keep it like this, it will automatically change the top level, and we can do something like that as well. That will work as well. Pretty good. Alright, that part is fine. Now what we need to do, we need to reset the numbering to single number system, and that we gonna do that using like this, and perfect. And with that we close our diagram. Well guys, that's pretty much for today's hands-on session. Before we close, let's quickly see how we can export the images. Well, exporting is pretty easy. Just right click over here and you get an option, export current diagram, export current file diagram. So you can choose export either of these depending upon what layer you are. So let's just select export current file diagrams. It will ask you what format. And this is also another very useful feature. You can use an image format, PDF format, or whatever format that you want. Just click there and it will export that. If you see over here within the like where this is created, so let me just open that. Yeah, and here's my diagram. One more very quick point, we can also define the header over here and footer over here, which appears on all the pages. And if we see over here, header is right over here, footer is right over here, and we can define something page of something like this. So this will show us like what's the page number we are currently at. So this is one page, and if you see over here, this is page 1 of 1, and within the header we can define the company name or whatever you want. So let's just put let's do coding over here. Now one last thing before we close, we can also have title for our diagram, and title looks like this. And that will print straight in between. So guys, all the things that we have seen, they are defined on the PlantUml page. You can go to the sequence, which is the first tab over here. You can see all these features there. So we have covered a lot of majority of part, but still there are a lot of features that you can do. You can add to your labels, such as these coloring of these labels itself. Then we have different lines, loops we have already came across. Then having these nodes across the objects, different shapes, so that you can go across. The idea was to get you introduced to PlantUml, and I think that will serve the purpose. So I think this is going to solve a lot of problems, at least to get started with PlantUml for sequence diagrams. If you still face some issue either with the installation or with any of the objects, just put that in the comment section. Well, that's pretty much for today. I hope you liked the video. If you learn anything new that is going to help you out, smash that thumbs up button and let us know. It motivates us to move forward. If you have any queries, you face any trouble, just let us know via comment section and we shall try to solve them as soon as possible. Yes. And please make sure you subscribe to the channel, especially on PlantUml. I am planning to have a video on the theming and some of the more advanced concepts. So that is going to be a great experience if you are working in any of the diagramming side, be it a developer, be it a solution design. Well, that's all for today. Have a great day and see you next time.